All right, welcome to the solo edition of Ketonian Korner. And today we're basically going to talk about enhanced recovery. So not all of the tips are going to find related to you, but hopefully you'll pick up some, and we'll talk through quite a few different things. And it's kind of a topic that was spurred from some conversations revolving around that find your stress sweet point. And in that session, we talked in detail about different stressors and how they can impact you. And we talked about how, exercise is a stress. And there's different topics revolving around, once you combine all those together, exercise could be contributing to that. So ironically, the most important thing is, what do you think the most important thing is for recovery? Anybody? Guess. Rest. You hit it. Sleep. Rest and sleep are the same thing. Sleep is the number one most important thing when it comes to recovery. And it may be self-explanatory, but we're going to get just a little deeper into the explanation of why. So why sleep? Well, sleep is when your muscles do the most growth. It's also the time where because it's the same thing, you make your most gains. So if you're a weightlifting, we'll take that as a good example. That recovery, when your muscles are breaking down and restoring themselves, is what happens at night. It's when you get your gains. It's also when your testosterone and your growth hormones spike the most. I don't know where it is, but it's and it kind of varies by person anyway, but it's not within the first few hours. You got to go through multiple cycles, and basically there's been plenty of studies that look at people who are sleep deprived have a tendency to be lower in hormones like testosterone, the growth hormone like we just mentioned, and the IGF-1, those type of things. So no matter what, we can understand, we all kind of have a general understanding of the why, but what is maybe silent is the insulin sensitivity. We've talked a lot about keto and insulin sensitivity, so it is just another compounder on top of if you're already sensitive when your insulin relax or your gluten tolerance is bad. It's just one more thing that can make it harder for your body to utilize insulin, which means your insulin is spiking, and we've talked plenty about that session. So what you're asking yourself right now is, great, John, I know sleep is important. What can I do about it? Because, for example, light exposure, it's not like I can, go through till I go to bed and not have any lights on in the house. So a few things you can, starting at the bottom and working my way up for some reason, because I did my transition with the light thing. I run on my laptop and on my cell phone a version of Flux. Flux is a free software package, but basically what it does is it kind of starts to dim the screen. I know iPhone and Android both have different components that do this. Now, the other thing that I did for light sensitivity is I've got a Comcast cable box, and it is like at eye level, and those stupid numbers just like glare at me like little teeny piercing daggers. So I just took
You don't need night lights.
I don't need night lights. I got it built into the thing. But what I did do is I just took a little red it's you can pick them up anywhere. It's like translucent red plastic, and I just taped it right over it, so it just dims those way down. And honestly, I really do think it helps. Maybe it's mental, but it worked. Tracking your sleep. I know a lot of people have got the Fitbits and those type of things. Do you guys look at sleep tracking at all?
I have it on here. I don't pay any attention to
Don't
it.
pay any attention to it?
At first I looked to see what it was, and so it'll give you a general idea that says, well, you've been sleeping for this long, which is not totally correct.
Right. So you hit on a couple of really important things. Is tracking your sleep is not a science right now. I use an Android watch, whether it's a Fitbit, whatever it is. It gives you generalities that kind of help you learn things, but by no means is it really tracking how long you're in REM sleep and everything within the really good detail, unless you're buying a really expensive one. That said, my app on my phone, which hooks to my watch, also records loud noises. And what I found actually is one thing that was impacting my sleep, and I didn't realize it. Not so much the snoring as is the dog in the middle of the night making a whole bunch of racket and me stirring. Because what it does is it kind of records snippets of the loud noises and puts like a little, to your point, snoring is a factor, and I do snore sometimes. But I found that the dog was waking me up more, and fixing that definitely helped. Exercise, more consistent you exercise, on average, the more restful your sleep is. Limiting alcohol, one of the things I did when I was tracking my sleep was comparing it. You can, at least on the Android sleep app that I have, you can put correlations. So I can say, I worked out yesterday, I did this, I did that. So one of the things I started tracking was my caffeine and alcohol. And when I had over a couple of drinks, and honestly I don't drink that much, but when I did, my deep sleep was just like cut in half. I had no idea that alcohol, and normally when I had alcohol, it's just like a beer with friends after work because it was appropriate. And I just quit doing that. And you go to those little after hour things where somebody's leaving or whatever, and nobody says anything if you don't drink. Just get a water and a lemon and don't even worry about it. Here I thought I would not be fitting in, and it just didn't matter. I mentioned caffeine. People metabolize caffeine differently, but for me, a good rule of thumb is if it's after 2 o'clock, I just try to avoid it, because the later in the evening it is, the more it tends to correlate with me. So those are just my, I guess, light tips on things that you can do. And one thing I'd like to remind everybody is those are all compounding things. So, if you're drinking and staring at your laptop when you wake up to go to the bathroom, sorry, not your laptop, your phone, because you woke up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, all those things kind of compound on themselves. So even looking at a few of them could be something that you want to possibly do. Moving on, better food quality equals better recovery. And I know that's kind of a broad statement, and some of it may or may not be as beneficial to you, but when you're going through and taking a personal assessment, is what I call it, calories your body needs to recover. The reason I put that first is because that was actually one of my bigger problems when I was doing a lot of, I know we had talked about doing a lot of the Les Mills cardio intensive classes previously, and what I found is my caloric expenditure was a lot. And I know, calories, it's not a perfect science of calories in, calories out, but I just wasn't getting enough food to recover. And once I upped my calorie intake, I felt a whole lot better from a recovery perspective. I've talked about the other macronutrients, but I want to hit on a few kind of high level. We got plenty of content in the past about these on detailed, but protein, staying keto / primal, paleo, anything like that. The high end, you'll see ranges, depends, but if you were trying to be a weightlifter, you'll find the high end on protein is a gram per body weight, and you'll see a lot of people will say 0.8 or even lower. But I would argue that if you're trying to build muscle, then you're going to want to get more protein in there, so you're more around the 0.8 to 1 range. Carbs, and put kind of a caveat on there is, you'll hear a lot of people say keto is under 20 or primal is 50 or less. And then they'll argue about net carbs and, all those different things. And really, when it comes right down to it, the more explosive your training is, the more you burn through your glycogen, the more carbs your body will suck in. And we're going to get into the details revolving around that at the end of the presentation today. We're going to talk about 2 carb strategies. I know I've been pretty, gun shy to recommend cheat days and or a carb reload or anything like that, but I'm going to talk about the examples of when you might want to do that. Saturated fat, omega-3s, any of the vegetable oil type stuff is what's going to lead to inflammation. So just a reminder on the fat side, the fats that we've talked about, the good fat versus the bad fat, we have got a whole episode on that you can listen to. The more of those bad fats you get, the more inflammation you're going to have. So with the inflammation also comes food quality. This is my best list, and obviously I don't even follow all of this because it's not always practical, but local if you can get it. We've talked about picking up eggs locally before. It's tough for me to try to get local meat. I always tend to just end up buying it at Costco. When I get together with somebody and do a beef share, then that's great. But for me, sometimes it's just harder for me to do that. So local if you can, organic if you can. And if you can't do organic all the time, and to be perfectly honest, I don't do organic all the time. You can definitely stick with the Dirty Dozen. If you're not sure what that is, just Google Dirty Dozen, and you'll see plenty of websites that have just a short list of the fruit and or vegetables that have the most or hold the most pesticides. Pastured animal products, again, that kind of gets back up to the local if you can get it. Pastured being, the more open and free. So our best example that we talked about recently was last week when we talked about eggs and then, the chickens being able to go and get, bugs off of the ground as opposed to getting GMO feed in the cage. And then we already talked about the high quality fats. So the inflammation is where all this revolves around. Inflammation is something that compounds also, much like sleep. Exercise is one of those things that will add to your your inflammation. So you just have to be aware when you're lifting, when you're doing those things, you're hard on your joints, those type of stuff, your body will automatically inflame a little bit just because of the exercise. So when you add seed oils on top of that, or high processed grains and industrial oils, then you are creating an even more pro-inflammatory response. So you want to try to avoid those. And then the last thing I kind of wanted to mention, and your results may vary, is trigger foods. Now you don't necessarily have to have a complete allergic response to something to have it trigger inflammation. So I would say the ones that are the most common are dairy, eggs, and nightshades. Nightshades are types of fruit and not as much fruit, mostly vegetables that can be triggers for some people. And we talked a little bit about an elimination diet. Those would be the things that you would eliminate and add back in slowly to see if you had triggers. I've never had a case where any of those have really bothered me, nor have I had a case where certain fruit were triggers. Sometimes that's just, it's more of your body just doesn't necessarily like a particular thing. So those are all things to look at and think about when you're kind of assessing where you're at. So keeping the inflammation down, we've said multiple times, keto is a low inflammatory diet. So is paleo, so is primal, all those things. You're looking confused.
How do I know I am inflamed?
Ooh, so the question was, how do I know if I'm inflamed? And the answer is so me personally, but I don't know if I've ever been that. More along the lines, if you can think about spraining your ankle. And I know that's like the worst case scenario where sometimes there'll be swelling, sometimes not. But sometimes it's just you feel like your joints are a little stiff.
Okay.
Or you feel like you're not moving the way you want. But a lot of people mistake inflammation and like arthritis. So some people who have arthritis actually might have inflammation, or those two are compounding on top of each other. So if you think of the worst case, or to me in my head, I tend to think of it as, well, this must be what arthritis feels like, or this must be like. And I've never exercised so much where I would feel like I've sprained, but I can tell you I've exercised enough, like some of these Les Mills events, since I'm a Les Mills instructor, we'll go and I'll do like class after class after class. And whenever I do something like that, I always feel inflamed. And it's hard to explain except for it's more than fatigue, because fatigue is, like, I would benefit from sitting down. It's just like my body aches a little bit. So kind of hard to explain. You almost got to feel it. But does that make some sense?
It's difficult to determine.
It's and there is no real good way. I mean, I don't even know if doctors have a really good way of deciding what.
But I was thinking more of the inflammation in your digestive system.
Inflammation in your digestive system. I personally think that those are two separate things. I don't disagree.
Well,
that
so are you saying that possible triggers, so that you're saying that one of those possible triggers could cause your joint to be inflamed?
Yes. Yeah, so the question was, without being, because so that would come through your digestive system. I don't disagree, but in the context that we're talking about with reducing inflammation, it's not as much about I'm having digestion distress as it's, I went to slide forward, but that I'm actually having my body be inflamed because of something I ate. So it's not like, so for an example, and to try to drive this point home, you could have skim milk and you drink it and your body does not react very well and you could get some inflammation from that. That is not your digestive system being inflamed. It's as your body is digesting it, your body then has a reaction to it. That's not to say that somebody who has dairy can't get gastral distress from having dairy. It's just not exactly what I was talking about in this particular point. So you're right in the fact that those things can happen. It's just that is not really necessarily related to increasing inflammation overall in recovery. But good clarification point. The next one is one that is kind of a silent one, and that's sunlight. And I know what you're thinking. Sunlight.
Vitamin D.
Vitamin D, yep. So sunlight and vitamin D, why in the world would that relate to recovery? Well, it basically has to do with those vitamins are the precursors for testosterone, and that's one, although it's much more complicated than that. I'm super simplifying it here. When you are deficient in vitamin D, you tend to be slower for recovery. You do not use your ATP like the fast energy sources. You don't replenish them fast. That means that you're not utilizing any carbs that you eat after a HIIT workout aren't being utilized as fast. It's kind of a super way of simplifying that. But when it comes to your body repairing and everything, if you don't have any of those precursors, obviously it's more than just testosterone. It also has to do with, all of the hormones revolving around that. You can't recover as fast. So it doesn't make a lot of sense that sunlight would have that much of an impact, but it depends on your situation. But if you are really low in vitamin D, and that's something that you're definitely deficient in, there are lots of people that swear by vitamin D because they're so low. When they finally get it, they completely feel different. They recover much faster. And that I've never had a situation where my vitamin D has been that low that I've seen something drastic like that. But I can tell you that I do take vitamin D when in the winter, when I'm not getting as much sunlight. I do tend to try to, when I'm outside at my house, get a little sun, take my shirt off best I can to try to get some of that natural sunlight. And obviously supplementing vitamin D isn't as good as the real thing, but when you're as pale as me, it's a lot better than burning. So, like I said, if you are deficient in vitamin D, and that's something that you can easily do tests on or blood work on, I know that although I'm kind of low, it's not something that I'm drastically deficient in. I don't take a supplement every day, but it is something that you can definitely try. Another thing sunlight does, we talked about it, or maybe when we were talking about sleep in the beginning, getting out and getting your sunlight in the morning helps set your circadian rhythm. So there is some people who say that they love to have their coffee outside because they like to get that sunlight right in the morning to help. And then there's also people, if that's something that you struggle with, you can buy those lights that I think I call them happy lights. I don't know what they're actually called, but that you can do to set up in your bathroom or at your office so that you can get that early in the morning and help reset that circadian rhythm. Okay, so watching your increase in cortisol. And cortisol, because we've talked about it before, is related to stress. Stress. We went in great detail, but to bring in a few points that I had a conversation offline with about that find your stress sweet spot. Some things that you can ask yourself, and this is when you get a negative situation, are you letting it impact you more than it should kind of conversation. So when you're thinking about stress, so I'm going to use an example that I think I maybe used before, which is the dentist's office. I don't know what it is about the dentist's office. I've never had any real bad. Maybe it's the sound of the drill. I don't know what it is, but I have to continuously remind myself when I'm at the dentist, is this really going to negatively impact my life so much that I should sit here and worry about it? And I'm not joking. I do that second bullet point, the sweaty palms and the elevated heart rate. I mean, I can literally sit in the chair and nothing has even started yet, and I'll start to just get clammy. It's amazing. And I have to tell myself, it's okay. It's not that bad. When it comes to that type of stuff, I mean, they're just cleaning my teeth. I mean, what the heck? Why would that worry me so much? But it's like that mindset, I just can't get out of it. So whenever you have a stressful situation, I think a lot of people will say, what's the worst thing that could happen? And is it really that bad? What if I did lose my job? you would lower my standard of living, and I would do this and that, and I would, would it be that bad? Well, no, I'd figure out a way to get out of that. So those are things. Here is my quick list of things that can compound. Work stress we talked about, getting a new puppy. Man, I mentioned my dog already. I don't think any of us are pregnant, but that doesn't matter if it's you or your significant other. having your significant other pregnant could be just as bad. Strained relationship, that silly to-do list that you got, your honey-do list that just the same things are on it all the time, and every time you look at it, you're like, oh, God, I've been trying to do that for 6 months. Any of those can compound. So, leaving stress and cortisol behind, I want to get into a few kind of advanced topics, and leaving that stress with just the statement, stressing over stress can make you more stressful. So just remember that. The advanced topics now, these may not relate to you, so feel free to ask questions about them as we go along, because these are some, I would consider them to be advanced tips. I'm going to generically call this whole section carb backloading. Technically, carb backloading is a term coined by John Kiefer. There's an entire book. I'm not going to go into the details. I'm just going to stay high level to when you hear people referring to carb backloading, all they're talking about is replenishing their carbs. And because we've talked about carbs plenty of times, if you think about that carb curve, and I'll link to it in the show notes, where you are on that carb curve can totally be dependent on where you are for your exercise. So if you're strength training and you may be consuming carbs immediately after. Now, I personally don't do this, and I think that's because I am not strength training on a multiple times a day. I'm just lifting heavy just once a week. So I tend to just let my vegetable consumption throughout the week and stuff kind of counteract that. I don't do anything specifically for that. But the point of why somebody would say they do carb backloading is because they're taking advantage of a window. After you work out, you are depleted in glycogen. Your muscles have pretty much, completely emptied themselves. So you have a window where you can get I'll call it a glucose uptake that will not spike your insulin because your body will consume those right away. And it's really kind of complicated from the fact of if you are carb sensitive, then you will not be able to do this. So this is really for people who have kind of been fat adapted for a while and they are doing something that is either super high intensive, explosive, like I'm sprinting, I'm doing something like that, or I'm strength training. They might want to think about a concept like this. Like I mentioned, I don't do that, but I can tell you that if you were going to refill your glycogen stores without having an insulin spike, the time to do it is after you've done some training like that. So there are people that cycle their carbs, which is kind of the next topic I want to mention. It's not necessarily directly related to carb backloading, but cycling through ketosis is another advanced topic where people tend to do that revolving around the workouts. So in this example, being slightly different, they would do a carb refeed once or twice a week, and they would time that for when they just did their heavy resistance training. Now, when I say a carb refeed, we're not talking about just throwing down and having 300 carbs. We're talking about trying to do an extra 20, an extra 30 grams of carbs, whole food carbs, revolving around when they did that. So a lot of times, if you don't know your body's reaction, you can test this by testing your insulin and or testing your ketone levels if you want to go that route, and you can see what your carb tolerance is and what you can do without spiking your insulin, without impacting your ketones in your blood. So the point is, you focus your carbs around your workout. Another thing that can be referred to is Carb Nights. You'll hear that concept thrown around sometime. That's also, I think, maybe a John Kiefer kind of comment, but that would be, having no carbs in the morning and just having their carbs near the evening time frame. That is it's not really cyclical ketosis, but it's just taking your nutritional layout and just moving them around to try to get a little added benefit. And again, that's an advanced topic, not really something that I make a point of doing, and it kind of inches a little bit into the concepts revolving around fasting in the morning and then working out. So when you talk about the fasting that is a fat fast would be you're only eating things from fat in the morning, and then your body never gets into a point where it's burning anything besides fat, so it stays in fat burning mode until you actually have a meal that does have carbs in it. So it's a form of, in my mind, a little bit of intermittent fasting where you just would have, a lot of times, example is a little bit extreme, but you would just have a bulletproof coffee in the morning and then just eat like a normal dinner, and you would have carbs at your dinner. So you're trying to get your body to stay in fat burning mode. Now, again, we've talked plenty about, it wouldn't have to be that. It could be cream. It could be a lot of different things. But even something like an avocado has enough fiber and carbs in it that would not have you stay in fat burning mode. And again, your results might vary a little bit, but that concept is one that you'll see out there too.
So what you're saying is that if you've only during the day, if you've only eaten fat, let's say, no carbs.
Yep.
And then, so let's say you're in ketosis, you're in fat burning mode, mm-hmm. You have a dinner that has carbs in it, and as you said before, the carbs start burning first, correct?
Yep. Yeah, and
so it takes you out of fat burning mode then as soon as that carb hits your digestive system.
Yeah, and that's a little bit, there's a lot of complications revolving around, but simply put, that is true. So let's say, just to give you kind of a full picture in your mind, if you just think about your insulin, because it's easy to think of, right? If you stayed in, let's say, about noon, you had coffee with a little cream, with heavy cream in it. Probably not enough carbs to spike your insulin. You kind of stay where you're at. But then when you got to dinner, you had a meal, and it was, all of the micronutrients. So you're going to have carbs, you're going to have protein, you're going to have fat. And because if you had just carbs, that would go straight up, right? You completely shut off, right? But because you're having a lot of micronutrients, that insulin curve will not go as high, and it'll go a lot further. So your body will stay closer to its baseline. But when you are doing that, it's a little more complicated because you're also refeeding yourself. So if you were active that day, you could be taking those carbs, and like that advanced topic we just talked about with the carb backloading, anything revolving around that carb backloading, you may just be tucking those carbs away in your muscles and not even necessarily utilizing them. And you could possibly even stay in fat burning mode depending on how many you had. But that's the ideal state where you would basically get yourself into a situation. But again, there is nothing wrong with having a little, carbs are not bad necessarily. I think a lot of times we keep thinking limiting your carbs, and you're thinking, compared to the standard American diet, yes, they're significantly lower, but by the time it combines with the fiber and everything else, it's not like it's going to be the roller coaster insulin ride that it would be as if you had a plate of spaghetti. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because I frequently on the weekends, sometimes I eat breakfast, sometimes I don't. But usually it's just eggs.
Eggs and bacon.
Bacon, but that's it. Not even bacon sometimes.
Yep.
But sometimes I just have coffee and that's it.
Yeah.
And this is on the weekends, and then I go late in the afternoon, I do my 2-hour workout.
Fasted.
And then I come and I usually eat, and I have to be careful because I am very hungry after that. I'll eat a fairly good-sized meal and try and watch how many carbs that I am.
Okay. So just to kind of follow up on what you said. So in your example, you are having eggs, very fat-rich, breakfasty kind of situation, and then you're waiting, and then you're doing your workout then is not quite fasted because you did have some fat, but it's probably pretty close. And in that situation, usually your refeed, you need to make sure you're not restricting your calories accidentally because you're doing that intermittent fasting thing. So the fact that you said you're so hungry you could eat, example is you could eat a horse or whatever.
When that time comes in the evening after my workout, I am definitely not restricting my calories.
You're not restricting your calories, and that's okay. I really think that that's okay. So,
but I also think that you also have to watch that because what I do then is I end up sitting for the rest of the night. Okay. It's late, early evening.
Yeah.
When this all
so
happens.
Your example is very fair. So what I think on average, and the people I've talked to the most about how, if it's coaching or whatever, usually if they're at that point where they're eating something light and then they're having just one big meal, usually I rarely say track your calories, but if you did just a trial run to see, you'll find that you're probably not that much, because if you think about it, you're taking what used to be the average person is breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and you're cramming it into a smaller meal and then a big meal. Usually, you're going to find that it's not too far different. On average, I would say the majority of people are actually accidentally restricting their calories when they go with a intermittent fasting model. So I would say on average, most people tend to restrict too much. So I wouldn't be too hard on yourself. But that said, if your snack is a 500 calorie bulletproof coffee, and then your dinner is tons, 3,000 calories, at some point calories do matter, right? And like I said, it's not a special formula, but the point is you can consume too many calories on a keto diet, and we've mentioned that before.
It doesn't matter what kind of diet you're on.
Exactly.
Calories still eat too much.
Yeah, calories are not a one-for-one, but if no matter what, you can still overeat, especially if you're snacking on butter and a lot of caloric-rich foods. So. All right, so I know they got a little woo-woo, or not woo-woo, a little propeller hat there at the end, but I just want to make sure we had somebody early on that was talking about, basically taxing out their adrenals and everything because they were doing, Ironman and all these huge, intense workouts. And I do think if you're doing intense workouts and you're following a nutritional ketosis diet, you just need to be more careful.